So you've built go-to-market systems at Linear and Descript and Canva. Tell me what you do as a go-to-market fractional architect.
Yeah, sure. So actually, we don't really consider ourselves like fractional or consultants. Like the revenue architect is a growth studio. So ultimately, our goal is to run experiments for our clients so that they can create pipeline, so that they can iterate on their positioning and basically build the right infrastructure for their revenue. So in many cases, agencies are coming out and they are activating audiences directly without really looking at the systems and the strategy of the company. And I think this is where we differentiate ourselves, is that we spend a lot of time with the revenue leader of the company, the founders, understanding the current value proposition, the ICP, the persona, the TAM, what they've tried before, what worked, what didn't work. So we validate all those assumptions, we create a system of context around it, and then we build the systems on top of it. And I think that order of operation is really important because it enables you to basically build velocity of experiments. Once you have the right context, the right infrastructure, the right systems, then you can just start a very solid, cadence or sprints of experiments. So we launch about 2 new experiments or 3 experiments per week. We meet weekly with them. We assess the results. We scale what worked. We stop what doesn't work. And we're very upfront about it. About 25% of the experiment we launched was successful. The rest we're going to have to either stop or reduce. But that's part of the process. And the more we iterate, the more we learn, and the better we are. But yeah, I think that's what really differentiates us. And we also work in a niche, which is like, PLG, AI companies, a lot of dev tools as well. And so we develop a certain, understanding of the persona of the market. And we're able to, with that deep market understanding of that niche, be very creative and accumulate, basically experience of what worked and what didn't work. And we do this through, obviously, historically through our memory, but now through actually, storing those insights in our Git repository. And those insights are, basically bubbled up programmatically by AI, which is also an interesting feature we have.
And let's just get into it. So first question we wanted to chat through, which was a bit more interesting and maybe spicy, was the question everyone's posting about on LinkedIn, which is, will Claude Code take over all of go-to-market operations? And I'm also just curious, how are you using it, and or how have you been integrating it into the business and how you serve customers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely changed a lot of the things we're doing. I think the real question in 2026 is, why are we still using the UI at all? Is it still relevant to use the UI? And 80% of what we do could be or should be done through API or MCP. And as a business that are servicing our client with systems, we are very limited by the UI. The UI is for us the main bottleneck in our process. So, I'll give you an example. So right now, we're leveraging MCP. We use MCP called Playwright that has been originally built for QA by Microsoft, and we're basically capturing data from the tools we're using through the UI, or sometimes we even go further and we reverse engineer. I shouldn't mention this because if the tools we're doing this with are realizing we're doing this, we're gonna be in trouble. We reverse engineer private APIs from the network traffic. And basically interact with their private API so that we don't have to deal with the UI, because otherwise we have to click through the UI, and it's SaaS platforms have created silo and technical depth through their UIs. And I think more and more operators are not going to be concerned about the user experience. They're going to be concerned about capabilities. And by capability, I mean, I want to send an email, I want to create a sequence. Those actions I should be able to trigger from my terminal without having to go in the UI. So I think this is the shift we're seeing, where a lot of SaaS founders have been focused on product experience and wrapping capabilities. And now we have to focus on capabilities and outcomes. And that's going to, focusing on that is also going to remove the fragmentation of the stack, because, we're not going to have to go through so many siloed, basically data models and tools.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and just add, to that, I think also it's I feel like so many tools that not just for go-to-market, but especially in go-to-market, they've grown and they've become so successful often because the UI was so popular, but also the UI, if you look at it, was part of the reason that customers were struggling to get value from the tool itself, when behind the UI was maybe a lot of different valuable things like data and the ability to orchestrate that data. But the UI was difficult to enable teams on, difficult to learn how to use. And so just creating a singular UI that can, interface across all these different products.
Yeah.
Is far
I'll give you
superior.
a quick example of if tomorrow someone creates an email infrastructure that enables email warm-up, email sending, I don't need to use Instantly Smartly
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love
But
to be
Instantly has an
programmatically.
MCP.
Well, yeah, but it's they're not like,
Yeah.
enabling all the functionalities
Yeah. Of course.
just yet.
It's very limited. Just yet. Yeah. They'll get there. But that, I guess that's a question for you. And the two questions is as you're doing this and you're trying to, I mean, I see in your posts, et cetera, and you're building, you're kind of at the forefront of all this stuff. Like, do you think there's kind of like, as I see it, there's like this economy of companies that are being built for go-to-market that are like CLI and MCP first. And then there's the incumbents like Take Instantly, and they're trying to like kind of retrofit and like offer MCPs up. And then you're in the middle there, you're building the stack. Like, which direction do you prefer to go? Do you go to like the AI native, like MCP native providers first, or would you prefer to just have the traditional tools like give you the MCP? Or
I
who do
think
you think
for
will win,
Yeah, I think it's gonna be each is gonna serve a different purpose. I think for our internal use cases, namely scaling delivery, enabling certain playbooks to be reused, and basically gaining efficiency in the way we deliver our service, we're always gonna go the MCP route. And I think that's why we were early in adopting those things, early to adopt the Git framework for everything we do. Ultimately, what matters a lot for us is decision tracing, understanding why we've made certain changes and giving that tracing to our clients so that after a year, if we step out, they're going to have that context and they're going to be able to leverage it. So that is very important to us. Most SaaS tools are not enabling this today. But if you're an operator, you might not need this level of sophistication just yet. So I think as a service operator, we are potentially over indexing on those capabilities, but the market will catch up. I think due to the nature of I think the market will catch up and require a lot more of those features.
And then maybe last question for now on Claude and Code and Claude Code. It's one thing using LEMS and code gen tools for your own business and your own internal projects. It's another connecting them up to clients. I'm just curious, what have you learned in how to actually deploy this kind of stack to each of your customers? Like, what's the hardest part of getting it deployed to a customer? Is it just security and compliance? Like, do they let you start using, Claude Code or whatever you're using?
Yeah. Security and compliance is the biggest hurdle. Honestly, like we usually provide the framework, the infrastructure, and how things should be connected, and then we let them execute. And then sometimes we get access to the repos, sometimes we do not. So it creates sometimes situation where we have to have a duplication of data, where they're gonna do what we do on their on the GitHub, and we
Right.
do our own things on ours.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely something we'll have to navigate. There is, I think, an entire set of tools called Context as a Service. Octave is one of them, that are potentially an alternative where agency and revenue leader could collaborate without the friction of the Git framework, which is obvious for people like us, but it's not obvious for a revenue leader that never touched the Git before. So having a context layer that is shareable and user friendly is probably the answer there. And I think we're having a lot of success using tool like Octave with some of our clients.
Yeah. Octave's great. I've had the CEO on the show not too long ago. And okay, and then you've talked about online the 3-layer stack, go-to-market stack, unified data, orchestration, the rep interface. What do you think the future of the rep interface looks like in a world of agents? And basically things that just perform actions for us. Why do we need reps at all? And what are they, if they do have a job, what are they going to be looking at?
Yeah, that's like a super interesting topic. I think that the bad rep is gonna disappear. The only people that are gonna, I think, A's are not gonna go anywhere. We're still gonna have salespeople. There's definitely gonna be a lot more scrutiny around the type of reps people are gonna be hiring, and I think people that are able to really, focus on relationship, judgment, negotiating powers, those are gonna be the one surviving in a sense in that landscape. And I think their workflow is going to be very different from what it is right now. There's probably three different ways or three different kind of avenues that I could see sharing the market. I think Slack and Salesforce are, going to be probably still the main way for sales to do work and interact with basically go-to-market data. There's new entrants that have interesting, business models like Monaco, like Rocks. So I think one of them is probably going to be challenging Slack and Salesforce in a meaningful way. And then you have custom UIs and people building their, vibe coding their own CRMs or their own UI. Ultimately, we'll see what unfolds, but it has to be that, the UI is a lot more dynamic and it's focusing more on, the next best action, the most relevant context at any given point in time, which today, even, vibe code CRM are not doing properly. You can have the best UI, custom UI. It doesn't resolve the fact that at any point in time, whenever new information comes, you have to revisit the entire set of, actions that you expect the rep to do. And I think we profoundly biased towards, okay, sequences. We worked with outreach sales love for many, many years. And,
Yeah.
deterministic workflows where action A, B, C are going to happen regardless are still the norm. Like most people are still using those frameworks. I
Yes.
think tomorrow we're going to live in a world where you're not going to have anything like a sequence. You're going to have an agent that monitors informations and upon any new signal is going to change the next best action. So you'll never have visibility over what's going to happen in the future. It's going to be dictated by whatever the agent collects as an information. And then human in a loop is going to basically, enable the reps to inject their skills and expertise when needed. I'm also pretty bullish on mobile. I think, what I just described enables a world where, sales are always providing input on the move. They can be commuting, they can be,
Mhm.
at a dinner and receiving just on their phone escalation process. Oh, we're about to send this email to this client that just performed as very important action and clicks yes or no. I think those behaviors are going to be something we're going to be seeing happening or starting in the next few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And also saw this clip recently. I think it's just come out last 24 hours of Jason Lemkin on the 20VC podcast raging about, what kind of employees should you hire going forward? Because whatever the function, whatever the role, it seems like we're not going to need as many humans going forward if you believe the narrative. And he said, look, the only people that are going to matter going forward and you want to hire are just in any function are not necessarily, the most experienced, not necessarily the best school. It's the only thing that matters is people who are AI native, people who really spend the time to learn the tools and know how to leverage AI in their job. And if you don't know how to use AI and you're not, doing that day to day, then you aren't going to be contributing as effectively and, as well as everybody else. And I'm sure that's going to be true also for sales reps. I mean, I see it already in a lot of
Yeah.
our customers, like the best reps are the ones who self-serve, teach themselves how to use a variety of tools. And even the ones that, maybe aren't offered officially and they're not paid for by the company, but they're using their own kind of homemade stack.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would agree with this. I would also counter argument is that time figuring out those tools is time not spent selling.
Mm.
And I think there's a balance between learning and just, learning how to build your own stuff and embracing and being AI native, which is super important,
Yeah.
but not over creating an overkill where, you spend half your day building micro stuff, micro apps. And I think that's where we have to draw the line between go-to-market engineering and salespeople. And I think a lot of salespeople are going to become go-to-market engineer
Mm.
if they are able to, make, upskill themselves and catch all the waves of new technology, because they're learning it the same way that you and I are learning it. We've been in the market for a long time, but the technology is so different that as long as you build this muscle of learning and testing things out, there's a potentially a really big pool of salespeople that are going to transition to more go-to-market engineering function. And the one we want to have to, focus on selling are going to be different different potential skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I guess just to segue on that point around, another angle to look at is sort of the build versus buy decision. So, if we're looking at the capabilities that we now have with AI and code generation, but also, what then happens with code generation that we've already talked about, which allows you to orchestrate other tools via MCPs, but, not only. And so you can obviously be doing things that used to be done across 10 different UIs. You can do it across one UI and at scale. This then kind of makes you feel like you can do anything and maybe even start to build anything. And I feel like a lot of companies then, as you see online, everybody starts building their own CRM and everybody starts building their own whatever. But I'm curious, like, obviously, I think it's a more nuanced debate. And I think there is a line where it still makes sense to buy things. And you're consulting all the time with, some of the fastest growing, highest quality technology companies in the world. Like, I'm curious what you think, but also how you think they're thinking about the decisions around build versus buy, even though they in theory have these superpowers now to build anything.
Yeah, that is the biggest risk right now is just like, how do you allocate your time? And I think I like to think about those things through like a few filters. And it's like, whenever you think you can build something, ask yourself those questions first. And those questions are, one, like, what is the type of value you're creating? Is it, infrastructure? Is it data? Is it logic? I think infrastructure and data are the thing that I would buy, because it's just, you can't buy a database of contacts. You can't scrape, at scale, the data you need for your intent signals. Infrastructure is the same. It's like, you're not going to, build clay if you want production grade enrichment infrastructure. It's just, I had this debate with a client last week. You could try. Are you gonna get to a similar functionality and capability in the amount of time you're gonna dedicate? Probably no. And then if it's logic or more point solution, I think there's a debate whether you could build it. For example, if you want to use LinkedIn automation tomorrow, there's tools like Unipile that a lot of the tools like Lemlist, Hayreach, or like Rust Machines are built on top. You can make a case that those are just workflows that are basically calling certain APIs. And if you want to experiment and not pay whatever those tools are charging, then you might want to experiment building it yourself. And then if you hit some limitation when you want to scale and maintain that tool, you might want to consider switching to that tool, which is like the second filter, like what I call the maintenance tax.
Mm-hmm.
Building it's going to take time. Maintaining is also recurring time you're going to have to invest. So who fixes the API errors, the person that need to maintain the tool in the future? If it adds basically a tax to your workflow, to your work stream, you really have to take this into account and see if it's not better like buying. And then I think that the last filter is probably the leverage test. It's if you spend that time, it's opportunity cost. If you spend that time building something, it's time you're not spending, creating more experiment, fixing higher infrastructure problems. And so you have to create leverage as an operator. And if you lose your leverage by building things that you could have plugged and built on top, that I think that's unfortunate. And I see this happening a lot. And there's a very big bias towards trying things, which I think is great, but it has to be at the right level. Ultimately, you want to make sure you're building a composable like stack. And if you build a functionality that doesn't unlock additional capability on top of it, then you could argue that you should buy it pretty much. That is kind of my framework of reference.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. No. And when it comes to kind of tools, tool selection, you have a lot of opinions and experience. You've got a menu of I want to use this API for that decision, and I want to use this data set and this data provider, et cetera. But not everybody has that. And so Obviously, one of the big trends that people talk about is that in AI, the LLM is often recommending what tools to use. You can just ask Claude, hey, build me a website, and it'll recommend that you build a website with Tailscale and all these other tools if you want to use a VPN, etc. I'm curious with go-to-market, it doesn't have the same, LLMs don't yet have the same knowledge base, I don't think, as dev tools. So it's not going to have the same strength of recommendation, but soon I'm sure they will. But I'm just curious, how do you think that space will evolve in terms of tool recommendation? How are you doing it today? How do you also stay on top of new tools yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that's super important is to, regardless how much experience you have, is always to just put your thought into the LLM and see what return. You have to be humble enough to say, okay, there's something that I might have came up last week that I don't know about, and I'm gonna just discover and see what the LLM thinks. Even if I am an expert on something, I'm always gonna go through the process of describing what I'm trying to achieve to give him context first, and then potentially brainstorm other potential ways. And ultimately, I think that there's, experience has value at two levels. First level, when you prompt the LLM, because the questions you're going to ask are going to be different, whether you know what you're looking for and what you're trying to build. I'm going to ask different questions. I'm going to scope project differently because of the lens of experience I have on how to build stack, and the things that I'm, expecting via someone that doesn't have the experience is going to write a very simple, prompt on what he's trying to achieve. So that's one layer where you inject your knowledge, and then I'm always systematically collecting the answer, reading it, and then filtering the answer with the lens of the experience I have. I have 10 years watching MarTech evolve, different layers changing, and so on. And so I'm gonna analyze the result through that lens and pick whatever is relevant and remove what's noise. And most of the time, to be honest, it used to be 50%. As of right now, it's 80-90%. Is pretty aligned with what I would have been recommending. And there's value in discovering. I mentioned an API like Playwright. I discovered the API, API through Claude Code, and now it's part of my workflow, and we build on top of it. So discoverability is, GEO AEO is going to be very interesting for MarTech and sales tech people in the future, because I think operators are going to buy software through LLMs and not through G2 anymore.
Yeah. Yes, I read this very interesting, also terrifying report that was done, a kind of research report on recommendations in LLMs. And TLDR is that, Claude Code, when asked to build a product in something like 95% of the time, it would choose to, as part of building out the product, it would instead of choosing to use a tool as part of the stack to build out that product, it would rather than choosing an off-the-shelf tool or an API that already exists. So for example, hey, I need feature flags for this piece of software, so I'll use LaunchDarkly. It says, no, we don't need LaunchDarkly. We're going to go build it ourselves 95% of the time, because it just believes that it can build a better, faster, cheaper version by itself. And the 5% of the time where it does decide, hey, actually, it's going to be easy and faster for us just to ping an API, in that 5% of the time, it always chooses the same provider for the given category. And the given categories are for payments, always Stripe. For repos, always GitHub. And so there's this power law effect in the way LLMs recommend things. And so it's going to be interesting in that if companies want to be playing the MCP game, I think, hey, I want to open my company up to be MCP. I'm going to be an MCP for X. You better hope to be the number one MCP in that category, or you're not going to get a lot of demand unless customers know you. They're like you. They know you, and they don't only rely on the recommendations. But the reality is the recommendations are like Google search. 95% of people will trust Google search, will trust the LLM. And then there's the 5% of people like you who know what they're doing, but most people are just going to say, build me a go-to-market stack. And then the recommendation is going to be Clay. Yeah. Because Clay is fantastic at marketing, and Clay is going to be that number one provider, for example, of that thing as part of that stack.
Yeah.
And so, there's going to be that war to be the number one or number two. If you're number four, LLM's going to be like, look, guys, I'm sorry. We're not going to show you.
I think it's going to be like in paid. LLMs are going to be about discoverability, which is top 3.
Yeah.
But then the final pick, the procurement aspect is going to be trust-based peer network.
And price and
Yeah.
The trust, which is like a multi-criteria
Right.
decision.
You can have two like programmatic AEO, GEO discoverability. So we're always going to trust the AEO too. But if I'm making a 100K decision to buy, Clio or, Salesforce, I'm going to talk to my peer and my trusted network that lives in a given community that I can trust before I press the button. So those two levers are things that marketers are there's nothing going to be in between. It's either going to be extremely bespoke human led or very programmatic.
Yeah. And then I know we don't have a lot of time, so we'll just jump around a bit. But maybe this one's fun, like agents. Where are we actually seeing them used in production today in go-to-market? Is there an example of something that you are seeing that's actually working, that's really making a difference?
Yeah. I think 90% of what we see called agent on the market are just, human or, action triggered workflows with LLM steps, which is fine, but I think it doesn't move the needle a ton. I think one tool that I really see standing out these days, and we're using it with the team at Canva. We rolled out a fully automated outbound agent for the entire marketing generation engine for the B2B side, which is really working tremendously these days.
Relevance has an
essentially it's basically replacing the set of emails that SDRs and BDRs would send to all the MELs and MQLs coming through the marketing engine at Canva.
Okay, that particular segment.
Yep. And so I think ultimately the way Relevance is building their product is interesting because they are building it around workforce, and workforce is a combination of agents. And I think that's something that I'm really, really bullish on. Agents talking to themselves, agent collaborating, and the process of human being in a loop when there's escalation path enabled for those agents to ask permission to execute. I think this is an interesting level. And what I'm seeing on the market right now is like sort of like 4 levels. You have like the workflow LLM, infused path, which is like, assisted workflow. You have the copilot, which is, sort of like the best of breed currently, where it's, you teach him a playbook, you create an agent, the trigger happens, and then the agent performs actions A to Z, it runs, and the result like a popping back. That's like, fairly standard. Level 3 is what I'm describing here is, basically you can have very different set of agents performing different actions and result across the stack. Account research, qualification, personalization, lifecycle management. And those agents are all connected to each other. So one agent running is going to send information to another agent for him to run on potentially something different in the future. And that basically enable a lot more power because the context becomes shared across agents. And that's something that I don't see a lot of tool building towards just yet. And I'm pretty bullish on that vision and that workforce aspect. The last thing that I'm not seeing anywhere, and that I'm and I'll call it level 4 here, it's basically self-driving. Obviously, we launch a lot of experiment with our clients. I think in the very, near future, we're going to have agents that are going to read natively the result of the experiment that we're performing and auto adjust the positioning, the ACP, the persona, the copy, potentially the timing of those agents without a human to being in a loop. That is like the self-driving motions that I think we are probably, a couple of years from seeing everywhere. But that's going to be a very exciting future because we're just going to be monitoring the performance and completely stepping out of the execution piece.
And maybe just last thing on the automation and agents, when you step into a Canva or a Linear and they say, hey, make AI work for my go-to-market, is there like a matrix that you use with them or something like that where you're like, customer problem is valuable to solve for you, or it's not, it's low value or it's high value. So maybe we help, address the high value ones with humans and we target the low value ones with AI, or do you do it the other way? Other criteria on the matrix, is there something like that you sometimes use or go back to with your customers? Is there some like mental model you use and like how to apply AI?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the different variables here are, the potential, like, the LTV potential of what we're trying to achieve, the current sales or marketing CAC from how much time are we spending, how much money, headcount, and other resources are we spending to realize this workflow? And the third one is, what are the risk, the risk of getting this wrong, and what is our confidence interval, or what is our risk tolerance for something getting messed up? And if your brand like Linear, for example, your tolerance for an email personalization being wrong is extremely low. It's actually zero. And so that's going to change completely the way you roll out agents. And first of all, how you phase and how you roll them out, you're going to be extremely, extremely careful, because you're going to want to look at the 99% accuracy as you roll them out. So, and you have teams that have larger TAMs that have a lower, higher tolerance for example, Canva is a massive TAM. I'm not saying they have low tolerance for errors, but given the number, it's plausible. It's interesting for them to explore. Well, where our emails are 95% good, because they were not sending that good emails in the first place with our salespeople. So we actually increasing the baseline. The baseline pre-agent is actually pretty low. So they are completely okay rolling out agents that are, 95% accurate. So I think that those are the different considerations, that you want to look at before pulling the plug on those.
The last one, I'll let you go, is the another spicy one, just to end it on here, is Clay. So you are, I think, still using Clay, a heavy Clay user. You're part of their community as well. So I'm just curious, where does it fit into your stack today? How do you think about Clay, also vis-a-vis, obviously, Claude Code, the memes that are out there? We're all seeing that Clay is cooked, etc. What do you think about Clay in your stack, and this new stack that you're building with clients? Yeah. How does it fit in?
Yeah, definitely still very bullish on Clay, and very, Clay is very embedded into everything we do. I think what is interesting with Clay is that they moved very fast from being an experimentation platform. And that's what made them, famous in the first place. They enable growth teams to build experiment fast without relying on code. And they transition from that. I mean, they still enable it, but they transition from that to enabling production grade go-to-market infrastructure, where you can build your TAM, monitor signals at scale, build custom data point. Now they build audience, which is even going upstream, building, data pipeline on top of the warehouse, which is almost like gross engineering or data engineering work. And so they capture more of the value chain, doing more orchestration. But now the experimentation muscle is now enabled through Claude Code. So the table have shifted under the platform has changed under them. And basically, when I need to roll out when I need to just create a list of contacts or accounts, and I need to do it cheap and fast, I'd rather use Claude Code with, the few MCP that I have with Apollo, Full and Rich. And so experimentation is now being taken over by Claude Code. And I think the audience, the originally one, the agencies, the SMB are eager to use Claude Code to build experimentation and create those kind of muscles. And I think the biggest risk of Clay right now is the GUI interface. The manual table management, clicking through columns and everything. So I think if Clay doesn't ship a really powerful composable API MCP layer, the code first competitors are gonna eat the experimentation layer that they were so good at, and potentially go up market and obviously capture some of the production grade feature that they are currently capturing and expanding into. So I think there's a bit of a dilemma for Clay here between capitalizing on their existing upmarket enterprise, customer base, while serving the, lower segments. Because tomorrow, if you're a big AI company launching, you're probably going to want to, I talked to those operators from Series A company. They want to build themselves. They want to experiment with Claude Code. And so as those companies are growing, they might not even need Clay in the future. So there's some interesting question there.
Yeah. Wow. What a great take. All right. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Of course, dude. This was great.